right, hello everyone. Welcome to our December 2014 class for Segment 1. Today we're going to look at the different house systems that astrologers have developed over eons of time. And before we get started with that, first of all, our housekeeping slides. With EAN, you can listen to our free audio podcast. You can look at our Astro Library and subscribe to that, and you can join us through our multimedia course, which any of you on this class have already done in Segment 1. Here's a brief slide on the Astro Library, which is a dozen years of classes, lectures, videos, whatevers that we have, that we have developed, recorded at EAN.
I was just telling everybody.
All of our materials.
I was just telling everybody how much prep time has gone into your 47 webinars in 2014. I think it's a lot less, a lot more than the whatevers. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. Oh, but take 47 times anywhere from 4 to 8 hours for every time you see one of these webinars. So just take 47 times 6. That's how long I've been sitting in front of the computer putting stuff in here. And so here's the multimedia course. Those of you in Segment 1 can join us in Segment 2, where we have monthly classes, and in Segment 3, which is yet to be developed into monthly classes. Although stay tuned, I have a Segment 3 slide at the beginning or at the ending of today's class. I ran into a slide on the 12 tissue salts, the biotissue salts, and that are so excellent. And so I have that slide way at the end because I thought, wow, I got to hang on to that slide. So here we are with our future classes next year. In Segment 1, we are going to go through a review of natal Pluto in each of the 12 houses, and if you'd like to volunteer your chart, please send me an email. I can't remember if I have a volunteer for next month with Pluto in the first or not, so send me an email with your birth data if you're interested in volunteering for one of these classes next year. And so again, here's our subject matter today, the different house systems that we're looking at. And as I was prepping here, I realized that I needed to just kind of back up a bit and give you some generics on astrology in general. And so in the world of astrology, we have heliocentric versus geocentric astrology. Heliocentric, helio means sun, and so that has the sun as the center of the chart. It measures all the planets in relationship to the sun, which is exactly or actually as they exist out there in the space in our solar system. And in heliocentric astrology, we have the Earth in the chart instead of the sun, and it's always in the opposite spot as the sun. Geocentric astrology, which is by far the most popular astrology, has Earth as the center of the chart, which is how we visualize it, which is how we see it from our Earth-centered perspective. So it measures all the planets in relationship to planet Earth. And it measures planets along the ecliptic, which is the sun's apparent path around the Earth. Astronomers have a tendency, well, not a tendency, it always takes me a few minutes to take a deep breath and get in my rhythm with classes, if you haven't noticed that. Astronomers measure planets along the Earth's equator. Astrologers have a tendency, although it can vary, to measure planets along the ecliptic, which again, the sun's apparent path. So here's a couple of charts for you. Okay, hold on, let me get this going. There we go. And I put them side by side, so I hope they're visible for you. But if you will notice, every chart today is using the identical data, December 23rd, 2014, which is today, 12:13 p.m. in Rapid City. Here is a heliocentric chart and porphyry houses. tropical system. This is all this italics is what you want to look at, and the difference is heliocentric versus geocentric. Now, geocentric is typically what we use, and at 12:13 p.m. we had a 1346 Aries rising here in Rapid City, and the sun was about 2 degrees Capricorn. In heliocentric, here's the green symbol for planet Earth, and it's just the opposite. 1 degree Cancer, 52 minutes. Now, exactly when we are looking at it again from our Earth Center perspective, and we're looking out there, the sun is below the equator, and it's been the winter solstice, so it's 23.5 degrees below the equator at the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere. From the perspective of the sun, or heliocentric, the Earth appears to be just the opposite of that. So I just am showing you that more as a visual than what's the difference in interpretation. I'm not very familiar with using heliocentric, so I would not be qualified at giving you any expertise in that area, but I just wanted to show you the differences between heliocentric sun-based system versus geocentric earth-based system, which is which most astrology is tropical or geocentric based astrology. The tropical zodiac versus sidereal zodiac. Tropical is moving. Sidereal is the actual constellations. So in the tropical zodiac, that first day of spring, which is 0 degrees Aries, is a moving point in space as we look out into space, into the celestial spheres, as they call it. And this first day of spring moves backwards along the ecliptic, that sun's path. That first day of spring moves backwards through the heavens or the stars or the constellations. I think it moves 50 minutes of arc each year. And so in 72 years, that equals 1 degree. And so it reverses 1 degree along the zodiac, or excuse me, along the ecliptic. And if you move at 30 degrees, you get more or less the sign of the zodiac. That's where we come up with the great ages, the age of Pisces transitioning into the age of Aquarius. Each of those ages are approximately 2100, 2200 years. There's no agreement among astrologers as to when this starts or stops. And most of them all agree that it's not on an exact year. There's that transitionary time period, the orb of influence that we'll call it. However, every 26,000 years, that first day of spring reverses through the zodiac an entire cycle. That's what we know as the precession of the equinox. And so most of us, again, all agree that we're leaving the age of Pisces and moving into the age of Aquarius. And that first day of spring more or less matches up to those constellations, but none of the 12 constellations follow exactly 30 degrees. Some are less, some are more. The sidereal zodiac we call the stationary zodiac because the signs match the constellations more or less. Now, more or less, again, those constellations are not exactly 30 degrees along the ecliptic. Some take up more space, some take up less. And if you look at our solar system, we're hurtling through space. And if you look at the Milky Way galaxy, that is moving even faster through space. So those constellations and their backdrops are actually moving in relative to our viewpoint. It's just that it moves so slowly, we don't recognize it. We think that it is stationary when we look at the sidereal zodiac. The tropical and sidereal zodiacs are about 23 degrees apart. I think it's 23 moving to 24 degrees apart, because and as we move into that age of Aquarius and move through that for the next 2,000 years, it's going to go 23, 24, 25, 26. It's going to move more degrees apart. Now remember, 1 degree every 72 years. So this is going to be every century getting further and further apart until it goes a full 360 and these two zodiacs line up again. Now, here's two charts. These are both geocentric, geocentric Earth-based. But here's the tropical zodiac with porphyry houses that we're very familiar with. And if you go to look up sidereal charts, you're going to find that there's many authors or many mathematicians on sidereal astrology. So as I was going through the list going, whoa, which one's most popular? I ran across Yuktesir's, and I forget my pronunciations, version of sidereal zodiac. And I thought, ooh, followers of Jeffrey Wolf Green Astrology, I'm going to pop that one in. So as you can see, we're very familiar with the first day or a couple of days beyond the winter solstice here, December 23rd. That's Sun at 2 Capricorn again. But in the sidereal zodiac, the sun is only about 11 degrees Sagittarius. So everything is going to move almost a full sign of the zodiac. Again, I don't really practice sidereal astrology, so I've not done a lot of interpretation in that way, but I wanted to just show you the differences between drawing up a tropical chart versus a sidereal chart. Play with it if you want to, for those of you who want to really explore astrology. So when we start looking at how do we create houses, in astrology we have what we call the circles of the zodiac. And many of you are quite familiar with the fact a circle has no beginning or end. So we have to create one. And over long periods of time, it was pretty natural to look at either the spring or the fall equinox as a starting point, because the plane of the equator, that halfway point on the Earth between North Pole, South Pole, and the plane of the ecliptic where the sun travels, they're at the same spot on the equinoxes. The declination of the sun is 0 degrees from the equator. The sun is on the equator. I will give you a definition for declination in just a moment here. And so we've created this starting point of the circles at 0 degrees Aries. Over eons of time, that's become the first sign of the zodiac. And as I was doing my research for this class, I really didn't find an author who could, it's almost consensus agreement that nobody knows where the 12 signs of the zodiac came from. Whether you look at Chinese astrology or Arabic astrology or any of the earliest forms of astrology, it seems that they all have an agreement of these 12 archetypes. My guess is they came from the constellations, and everybody had their stories of those 12 constellations which follow the ecliptic more or less, sometimes above, sometimes below the ecliptic. Now, the Tropic of Cancer is when the sun's path is 23.5 degrees above the equator. That's what we call the summer solstice, or the first day of summer. Tropic of Capricorn is when the sun's path is 23.5 degrees below the equator, winter solstice. And as we know, this is what we have experienced right here on planet Earth. And I didn't put a slide in for this, but in case you don't know this, the Earth is fatter at the equator than it is at the poles. And because it's a little bit fatter at the equator, when we rotate on our axis, we don't rotate straight up and down. We have a little circle that we make. Think of taking a what do you call those things? As top. Help me out, Leroy. Where you try and spin, something and it kind of wobbles when it's making the circle.
So it'd
That's
be
what the
like,
Earth.
it's like throwing a butternut squash down and trying to make it, you know, and rotating it or spinning it like a top. Yeah,
Is spinning it like a top, and that top has a wobble, and that's what the Earth does. And that wobble is that 26,000 year precession of the equinox. And so because of that, because the Earth doesn't stand straight up as in comparison to its path around the sun, it makes that wobble, and it looks like the sun's moving above and below our equator, but it's us moving. So again, don't want to get too technical on you, but just trying to give you some little tidbits. Here's a visual of it. Here we are pointing the Earth as if we have a North Pole and its opposite South Pole, and we have our equator that's projected out from planet Earth, and this is what appears to be the path of the sun going around, and it's actually the opposite of that. It's actually us going around the sun, and we're traveling above and below the path of the sun. As we go around the sun, we travel above the ecliptic, we travel below the ecliptic. But it looks like the sun, again, is doing it instead of us. And as you can see right here, our equator and the sun's apparent path, first day of spring, 0 degrees Aries, first day of fall, 0 degrees Libra, first day of summer, Tropic of Cancer, first day of winter solstice, Tropic of Capricorn. And this is where the sun appears to be traveling right now as we're spinning around in our axis. Now, declination is a latitude measurement. Latitude is degrees above and below the equator. Longitude is degrees east and west along the equator. Okay, so latitude is degrees above and below the equator. Declination of planets are degrees above or below the celestial equator, and that celestial just means we've projected the equator from Earth out into the heavens. And we do that with all the great circles. We project them out into the heavens from our Earth viewpoint. And you hear a lot about declination of planets. Well, 23.5 degrees north or south. By the way, this 2344 is not correct. This is correct, 2327. The sun can only travel 23.5 degrees north or south of the equator. So when a planet is out of bounds, that means that planet has moved beyond 23.5 degrees north or south of the equator. You'll hear about Mercury or Mars, for instance, being out of bounds. That means its declination above the equator is above 23 degrees, or it is below the equator, 23.5 degrees. And the astrological interpretations of out of bounds is that that planetary movement gets wild. It's not contained within the sun's orbit. And so astrologers who've researched this have more or less found that when a planet is moving out of bounds, extremes below and above the equator, that planetary energy or archetype in human consciousness gets extreme. It's extreme in declination. It gets wild. It doesn't act in predictable fashions. So that's what out of bounds means. Now, in astrology, when we look at a conjunction, for instance, we're looking at, if you've got clear skies right now, and we don't, so we haven't been able to do this, but if you're watching the western horizon since the new moon on Sunday, When you're looking at just right when the sun set, you're going to see that sliver of the moon, new phase to the sun. You're also going to see Mercury as an evening planet, and you're going to see Venus as an evening planet. Both Mercury and Venus are ahead of the sun, and so they're rising in the evening sky before their retrogrades and next retrogrades in 2015. When you look at a conjunction of two planets in the sky, their conjunction is being measured in longitude, meaning that vertical measurement along the ecliptic. But they may not be equal in latitude. They're not at the same declination. So you will hear, in terms of declination, parallel and anti-parallel. Parallel is when two planets are at that same declination. They're at that same degree of latitude above or below the equator. And when they are parallel and they're at that same spot above or below the equator, they can be opposite each other, square each other, but when they're at that same declination, there's a lining up of energy for astrologers, and we will commonly interpret planets in parallel declination as conjunctions. When you're looking at your astrology grids that show your aspects, oh God, the sun just came out. Wow. That'll be two little vertical parallel lines. There'll be like two little L's when you're looking at that grid between any two planets. That's how you know it's parallel. Anti-parallel, you'll have those two little lines, and there'll be a horizontal line running between it. And that tells you they're anti-parallel. And that means two planets are equal distance with one planet north and one planet south of the equator. For instance, Mercury can be 10 degrees above the equator in declination, and Mars is 10 degrees below the equator in declination. In astrology, that's commonly interpreted as oppositions. I think I need to spell that word better. And so when you are looking at, again, that aspect grid, you as astrologers can start to take in parallel and anti-parallel between planets as interpretations. If you want to add on to that, whether or not planets are square each other or whether or not they even have an aspect with each other. This is something to add on as a practicing astrologer if you want to take it into more detail. Again, anytime somebody has questions, you're welcome to interrupt and ask. And Leroy, just interrupt me if there's any questions coming along from anybody. The great circles. And so there are 5 great circles when we are casting an astrological chart. And again, these great circles, they are actually on planet Earth, but astrology projects them out into the heavens in the same way as they are on the surface of the Earth. And when we project them out there, we call them celestial spheres. The first 2 great circles are the same for everybody, which is the equator and the ecliptic. The equator, we're all familiar with that. That is planet Earth being evenly divided between the north and south poles. And as we all know, when you are visiting any area of the world along the equator, there's no seasons, because it seems that the sun is always equidistant in regards to day and night almost. And again, I'm don't take me on gospel with everything, but you don't see the changing of the seasons at the equator. The ecliptic, as we've said before, it is the Earth's path around the sun, but from our Earth-centered geocentric viewpoint, it appears to be the sun's path around the Earth, and we all observe it from planet Earth, depending on where we are away from the equator. Right now, winter solstice, if you are up north, for instance, in Alaska, it will appear as though the sun never rises because the sun's so far south. You'll have light come, won't last very long, and then most of the day is dark. It's the opposite right now if you're down in Australia, and then that switches to the opposite on the summer solstice. But those circles are the same for all of us. Here are the circles that change based upon the natal or birth chart and where each of us were born. So the horizon, the meridian, and the prime vertical are unique to each of us depending upon our birth moment and place, depending upon our birth time and space. So the horizon is a circle that's parallel to the horizon of the birthplace, and it's projected out there as a celestial sphere. So all of us, you can just think about what city and state or city and country, what place in latitude and longitude were you born. Just think of where you were physically born. From that physical horizon, we drop that circle down to the middle of Earth and we make it parallel to the horizon and we put it out onto, I'll show you the visual in just a moment. We'll put it out there into the heavens. The meridian is connected to the horizon, which is the meridian is a circle that joins the poles of the horizon. So when we're looking at where we were born, if we decided to look straight up above from our birth point, that'd be the zenith. If we could look down through the middle of Earth and look straight below where we were born, that'd be the nadir. And so we will connect the poles of the horizon, zenith and nadir, with the poles of the celestial equator, North Pole, South Pole. The prime vertical, which is not used a lot in astrology, although I suspect it's just as valid, it becomes another first house, seventh house cusp, although it can be 12th or first house and sixth or seventh house. The prime vertical intersects the meridian at right angles, 90 degrees, and it goes through the zenith and nadir as well. So here is a visual of this. So following my arrow again, we all know the equator, which is halfway between the poles of planet Earth. And we all know the ecliptic, which is the sun's apparent path around the Earth. And so the next one we're going to look at is this red line that we have the horizon. And the zenith of that horizon is this X right here. And so somebody born right here on planet Earth, northern latitudes, if we carried that horizon circle to the middle of the Earth, it'd fall right here. And so wherever that horizon crosses the ecliptic, we have the ascendant. Opposite that is the descendant. And remember we said the meridian then would take the horizon and it would connect the zenith of the horizon, point directly above where we were born with the North Pole. This becomes the midheaven, okay? And then we would take this meridian and we would connect the nadir of the meridian, okay, which we're not seeing down here, but it's going to be right in here with the South Pole. This would become the fourth house cusp of the chart. And then halfway between the meridian, or excuse me, a quarter of the way from the meridian is a vertical circle. The horizon is a horizontal circle, meridian is a vertical circle. We intersect that meridian 90 degrees, a quadrant, and we get the prime vertical. And so that prime vertical creates the equatorial ascendant, which again can fall either first or 12th house cusp, and it'll create what they like to call the anti-vertex and vertex. Now, I'm not an expert on that in interpretation either. I'm just more interested in showing you the astronomy of that. And somebody somewhere in the evolutionary astrological world will probably start to do the observed correlation as to interpretations of vertex and anti-vertex. The interpretations will probably be similar to ascendant, descendant. Now, in the tropical zodiac, as we start working with the different house systems, they're all going to be using, well, most of them use these 5 great circles: the equator, the ecliptic, the horizon, the meridian, and the prime vertical. Again, if I'm going too fast for anybody, you're going to have this recording to go back through it again. Now, when we start looking at house systems in astrology, tropical, or what we know as Western astrology, sidereal is known as Eastern astrology. Tropical or Western astrology uses 2 zodiacs. We have the signs, which are generic to everybody. Everybody who has the same birth date and time will notice that they have their sun at a certain degree in minute of the zodiac. And those signs rotate on a 24-hour basis around a circle of the ecliptic and the equator. It's the Earth rotating on its basis. And that's what we sometimes will call diurnal motion. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Diurnal. Leroy, correct me if you know it better. Diurnal motion. Now the houses become personal to a birth date, time, and place. And most of us know when we look at an astrology chart, the houses are stationary. And we start that first house cusp or ascendant on the left center or eastern part of the circle when you look at it. And again, as I said before, we all know there's 12 signs, there's 12 houses, and that origin of those 12 archetypes is unknown. Now, there's a lot about the history of astrology, of various astrologers, especially in the last century or two, wanting to put different interpretations between signs and houses. And for those of you who come up through evolutionary astrology, one of the things that you know from the teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green is that we look at a sign, a house, and that planetary ruler as an interchangeable archetype. In other words, there are the 12 archetypes, whether we're looking at a sign, a house, or the planet that rules it. The example is Aries' first house and ruler Mars are all going to be a similar archetype in consciousness. Where that comes from is when we look at natural law. Truth is simple. Human interpretation of truth is where we complicate natural spiritual laws and principles. And so we can take these archetypes of sign houses and planetary rulers, and through human consciousness, we can make it as complicated as we want. Those of you who have ever seen teachings by Jeffrey Wolf Green know that he calls that stuff a lot of BS, and he gets pretty direct and blunt about it. If you've seen some of his old videos in his teachings. So here we are looking at, very simply, the circle divided into the 12 pie-shaped segments we know as houses. And from this source right here, they're spelling ascendant, descendant this way. Ascendant is always that eastern horizon, where a sign of the zodiac is rising. The descendant is where a sign of the zodiac is descending. I can't pronounce this, but this is the midheaven, and this is the nadir. And many of us are familiar with this. And we're familiar with these 12 houses being stationary, and we're familiar with the 12 signs rotating around these 12 houses every 24 hours. Now to go back, again, the signs are generic to everybody. We are all experiencing Pluto direct at about 11, 12, 13 degrees Capricorn. But it gets personalized via the birth chart when we freeze that rotation of those signs onto the 12 houses. So that's why the signs are generic, again, broadly for all of us, and this is why the houses are personal. That, for instance, Pluto traveling at 12 degrees Capricorn is going to be in different houses for all of us. And so that transiting Pluto in those different houses, this is where it gets personal. It's always going to have a different interpretation based upon which house that transiting Pluto is falling in. This is true in the natal birth chart as well. And so I like this quote by Martin Seymour Smith, and he's the one who, I've mentioned this before, wrote the book called The Modern Astrologer. And so many astrology books just get one printing and then they're gone. And I think ESAR is starting this online astrology-based system of saving all the astrology books that have ever been in print. And so if you can find a used copy of this book, I found him to be pretty good at explaining the astronomy of astrology. And he's one of the first astrology books I ever picked up. I studied general astrology for 2 years before I ran into Jeffrey Wolfgreen's EA in 1985. So I picked up my first astrology book in 1983. But I love this quote: a personal zodiac, the houses, is superimposed upon the natural zodiac, the signs. And so when we start looking at the different house systems, they're all measured with both time and or space. And so time, as you know, birth date. Space, where on planet Earth were you born? One of the exceptions to this is the equal house system. The equal house system will find the ascendant. In other words, where does that horizon line up with the equator and the meridian, and then wherever that ascendant is, it just marks all the rest of the houses equally 30 degrees around the circle. So all of the other house cusps are really aspects to the ascendant in the equal house system. Now, this is a very popular system. I have clients come to me and go, I'd like to hear what evolutionary astrology has to say in interpreting my chart. However, I use equal houses. Can you read my chart? And I go, sure. If you want me to read it that way, I will. And I take the principles of EA via the planets in their signs and wherever houses they fall with equal house systems. Most of the time I'll run 2 different houses, and I use Potpourri, as many of us do in EA. And I'll run Potpourri and I'll say, would you like me to do a comparison to other house systems? And if they want me to compare equal to Placidus or equal to Potpourri or Coke, I'll do it. Coke, Placidus, and Potpourri are by far the 3 most common house systems used, although equal is pretty popular as well. So here is an example using that same birth data that I had earlier from today, a little after noon on the 23rd of 2014, December. Here's equal houses. We find that ascendant, and then we just put the same degree and minute of all 12 signs around. And depending upon where those planets are traveling out there in the solar system, they will fall in these particular houses. And so as you can see, every single house is 30 degrees apart. Every single house has 30 degrees within it. And so there are many astrologers, and don't quote me on all my astronomy with horizons and meridians. I could make mistakes here today, okay? But one of the things that is an argument against equal house systems is that it pretty much ignores where the actual meridian is or where the actual zenith is directly above the horizon. And because again, the midheaven in equal houses isn't just a 90-degree aspect from where um, ascended is. I thought it was pretty interesting. You know, lots of times when I'm just prepping for class, I'm like, okay, what I have a tendency to do is try to get all my outline done, and then I start plugging in houses or plugging in charts wherever I need them. And so here I am today at noon going, oh, I better put the houses in. Oh, isn't it interesting that as I'm doing my work, I have Uranus South Node conjunction and Pluto up here at the midheaven. I just thought that was a cute little quirky thing. So here we are as Pluto astrologers, Pluto on top of the chart studying the houses. Let's see where Pluto falls in the different house systems as we're looking at it. So again, is this showing up clearly for everybody at this point without being too complicated? And the beauty of these webinars and video classes is you can go back and repeat this class, however it works for you, however many times you need to. So again, house systems, using space and time, trisect. Tri means those three great circles that are unique to every birth moment: the horizon, the meridian, the prime vertical. House systems use space and time, trisecting semi-arcs and quadrants in complicated tables. Semi-arcs. The sun's diurnal arc above and below the horizon. So remember, diurnal is that Earth rotating on its axis, and it appears like the sun's traveling around us. Well, that sun's going to travel above the ecliptic, below the ecliptic, and in our charts, or in a birth chart, it'll travel above the horizon, below the horizon, from wherever we're located on planet Earth. So semi is half of a circle. Half semi-arc, half a circle. Quadrants is where we're dividing it further into 4 quarters. So wherever we're born, and that horizon we have with our meridian from our personal space above and below us, we'll take horizon and meridian and divide the 4 quarters. Many times astrology is going to just ignore that prime vertical, which again is a vertical circle, at right angles to the meridian, which is a vertical circle. And so we will take those movements and measure them along the ecliptic or along the horizon, usually the two of them, combining the horizon and the ecliptic. And then they'll divide those houses up within. Now, most of your major house systems, the horizontal axis, the ascendant, descendant, first house, seventh house cusps are going to be identical. And most of the house systems, the vertical axis, the midheaven nadir, 10th house, fourth house cusp, they're going to be identical. Where the majority of house systems differ is in the intermediate houses, the second house, third house cusp, the fifth and sixth house cusp, eighth and ninth, 11th and 12th. That's where their tables start to get the divisions all changing along the area. The Koch house system is based upon Walter Koch. You see his birth time here. This is more of a modern base house system. He wasn't a German astrologer. And again, very simply, complex house tables based upon oblique ascension, the sun's movement, apparent movement around planet Earth in a 24-hour basis. Now, because the sun's movement goes above and below the equator in its apparent movement, those tables will be based upon where that sun is above or below the equator throughout 12 months of the year. I actually, in the early 80s, learned how to cast a chart by hand. It wasn't even a consideration for me to teach you how to do a chart based by hand. If you want to learn how to do that, contact ESAR. They do a certification in that. For me, I mean, we had no choice 300 years ago. We had no choice before computers. But now that we've got computers that will do it so much faster in a blink of an eye versus 2, 3 hours that it takes to do it by hand with math, with our human tendency towards making mistakes, I'm like, don't waste your time learning. I mean, learn how to do it if you want to. But for me, if you know where it comes in the heavens based upon a visual, let the computer do it and spend that 2, 3 hours learning interpretation. Just Kim Marie's opinion here, okay? And so here's the same birth data with the Koch house system and geocentric tropical moving zodiac. All right. We see, here we are, Uranus, and the south node is still right here at 1347, but look at how the midheaven changes from equal house systems. That midheaven, which becomes more located to where exactly the zenith was directly above me in Rapid City, South Dakota at a little after noon today when I'm casting this chart. So as you can see, Pluto has just moved past the midheaven, or in reality, the Earth is rotating on its basis this way because the signs will go 13, 14, 15, 16. That's the Earth's rotation. You can see that that midheaven changes a little bit here, and it actually puts this transiting Pluto, or the natal chart of this event chart, into the 10th house versus that 9th with the equal house systems. Pay attention here a little bit though. Just for instance, look at the fact that 9th house is 16 degrees Sag. The 11th house is 1 degree Aquarius. We'll just watch how that changes in our different house systems as we compare them. Placidus. This is another very popular method, and as you can see, they don't. I didn't have time to look up to see whether most people thought he was Spanish or Italian, but he was a mathematician back in the 17th century. So as you can see, this is a house system that's been in use for quite a long time. Complex house tables that trisect the semi-arcs and the quadrants. Compare this to Porphyry. Look how far back he lived. So this is an old house system. It's known as a more simple house system based upon quadrants of the horizon and meridian. Remember, wherever we're born, we have that horizon straight out. If we reach our arms out straight out from us, that's a horizon. And then if we look directly above us and put our arms vertical up and below, that's our meridian. And so Porphyry will just use that horizon meridian, that's the ascendant descendant midheaven nadir that turns out the same, and then it takes those 4 points, those quadrants, and it evenly divides the houses into third. If you want to cast a chart by hand mathematically, Porphyry is going to be one of the simplest ways to do it after equal houses. It means that the first and third quadrant houses are equal and the second and fourth are equal. So again, simple to understand. And this is, Jeffrey Wolf Green used Porphyry houses, and many evolutionary astrologers use them. And what Jeffrey would say is that he in his early days of observing correlating, he practiced with Koch, Placidus, and Porphyry. And he found that the Porphyry system was the better explanation in psychological terms. And very simply, he just observed that it was a better explanation or observation in psychological terms of the timing of the houses and the planets transiting through those houses. And then he also felt that was the same with the natal charts as well. First time I had Jeffrey read my chart, I was so early into it. He's the first astrologer I ever had a reading with. This was in the days before computers. I mailed off to get a chart. It came on, remember that big wide paper with white and green lines? It was like 15 inches wide, the early days of computers. That was my first chart. It was Placidus. It gave me a seventh house Pluto, and that's what Jeffrey read, because in those days you just read whatever chart showed up in front of you. Didn't have your own computer to put your own personal house systems in, and astrologers didn't run around with computers back in those days, although there were handheld calculators that started to show up in the 90s, 80s, 90s, I think it was. In Potpourri, I have an 8th house Pluto. And as I've observed my own chart over the years, I do feel that I'm an 8th house Pluto over a 7th house Pluto. So here is the same birth data in Placidus. Same horizon, 1347 Aries, same vertical, 647 Capricorn. Remember in Coke it was 16, wasn't it 1644 or 16 Sag something? But look at how the 11th house was, instead of 1 Aquarius, it is 28 Capricorn. And it makes an interception of Pisces Virgo going on here. Now Placidus is probably the most well used chart system, because again, Placidus lived back in the 1600s. And did I? Nope. Okay, I got something. I'll tell you something else. It's another house system coming up here. So you see again, horizontal and vertical axes are the same, but it's the intermediate house cusps that change. Here is Potpourri. We have the same vertical, or excuse me, same horizontal and vertical, but the inner house cusp start to change. Here we've got 9 Sag versus 16, and we have 9 Aquarius versus either 1 Aquarius in Coke, or what was it, 28 something in Capricorn, I think it was. But look at how we will have the same quadrant with the number of degrees in the first and the third and the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant as we're starting to look at this. In other words, if you're looking at this, we have 9 Sag, 9 Aquarius, 11 Scorpio, 11 Pisces. And here we have 11 and 11, and we have 9 and 9. In other words, there's equal division of these quadrants. Now go back and compare Placidus. We have 16, 22, 26, 28. You see how even though the quadrants are even though we have the similarities between these quadrants, the interchanging of the houses get very different. We don't have the same between the 9th and the 11th, between the 7th and the 12th, versus again, going back to Potpourri, you see how there's an even mathematical division of the quadrants. Simple to cast by hand mathematically, and from a lot of evolutionary astrology perspective, than a more simpler explanation of human consciousness psychologically. And so a couple more houses that I just want to explain to you. But first of all, as we've looked at Coke, Placidus, and Potpourri house systems, they all become very distorted in the polar regions, meaning if you are born near the North Pole or the South Pole, which is above 67 degrees latitude, below 67 degrees latitude from the equator, during the times of the year of the solstices where the sun is close to the polar regions above or below, their house systems can become very distorted. Leroy's brother is married to, his wife was born in Alaska, and she has very, very distorted houses in the Porphyry house system. I use her chart in Porphyry, but she'll have some houses that are so small, transiting suns through it in, a week and a half, 2 weeks, and she'll have other houses where the sun takes almost 2 months to go through that house. Now, Campanus house system, as you can see, Johannes Campanus was back in the 1300s. He was actually the astrologer to one of the Catholic popes. This is a quadrant system dividing space. The next two house systems are dividing space. Trigonometry, blah, 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 I'll just let you read that. Intersections via the prime vertical. Very irregular houses as well. You can find double intercepted signs with this house system. Now, there's a few astrologers that use it. I've heard of it. I've never used it. Here is an example with the same birth data, December 23rd, 1213, Rapid City, South Dakota. Look at these houses. Look at how wide the 12th and 1st house is. Look at how small 3rd, 4th, and 5th house is. You can see that we still have 1347, we still have 647, so it's saying space, so I don't know for sure if that horizontal and vertical is always the same with Campanus. It must be, because it sure seems that way. But for some reason, using space instead of various tables of space and time, you see these wide houses, and you see 4 intercepted signs with Campanus. Again, I don't know a lot about it other than what I'm explaining to you and not going into a lot of detail on it. Regiomontanus, he's from the 1400s. He was a mathematician at the University of Vienna. Another quadrant system, dividing space, trigonometry via the equator. Campanus was via the prime vertical, Regio via the equator. Now, it's similar to Placidus houses. And if we look at this one, same horizontal, vertical, so they're apparently the same there. And yet the house systems were different. Remember, Placidus was 16, and I can't remember, it was 1 degree Aquarius on the 11th, I think it was, but you could go back and refer to these if you do the printout with these. So as you can see, a little different there. But we start to get to compare apples and apples and who's right, who's wrong. Who knows? Finally, 0 degrees Aries house system. This is where the ascendant is matched up with 0 degrees Aries. In other words, the natural zodiac matches up the house system. This is used with unknown birth time, as the planets and signs match up to the same natural houses, and interpretation is simplified. I use 0 degree house systems in my forecasting a lot. For those of you who watch me do forecasting webinars, you'll see many times I'm casting a 0 degrees Aries house system, because again, it matches up the signs with the natural houses, and it's used in forecasting, which is what I just said. And so if you have a totally unknown birth time and someone wants you to just read their chart, I'll do it. But when I have nothing to go by for time, I'll do a 0 degrees Aries house, and I'll read the planets in their signs, and I'll read the aspects between their planets. And when I'm matching it up naturally, I don't have to get into the complications of guessing houses or having various houses, confuse me or mix me up. Here is an example of that. And so here's again, same birth data we've been using all along. Here's Uranus and Aries in that same degrees and minutes, But I put that ascendant at 0 degrees Aries. I put every house cusp at 0 degrees. That's what Aries house system is. And then the planets are falling in their signs in the natural houses. And then that can be, oh, I've just remembered, I forgot solar houses in this, but I'll explain it. I'll explain it to you, okay? And so here you are using, okay, the signs in their natural houses, and it allows you to take the complication of houses out of the picture for the most part, because everything falls in the same archetype sign and house. It is, I like to use this with forecasting because again, it simplifies what I'm looking at interpretation wise. Not to say that you can't cast this chart with potpourri houses wherever you are located in your own areas, and you'll all have that degree of the ascendant and all the house cusp changing. Solar houses is where we take the sun and we would make the ascendant 1 degree Capricorn 52 minutes and put that ascendant right there. And it typically then uses equal houses, and so this would become 152 Aquarius, 152 Pisces. When I do, I'll add this in at the end here with the PDF, so you've got it to look at visually if you want to be able to see that. And so, evolutionary astrology works with all house systems. And so that's all the slides that I have because, again, here is the classes. If you want to volunteer to look at your natal Pluto through one of the 12 houses, send me an email with your birth data. And I'll probably just do first come, first serve if I have, 3 volunteers with Pluto in the second house or whatever houses. Here's my public webinars that we're looking at. Monday, January 5th, I'll do the 2014 forecast. And as we look at Saturn and Sag over the next 3 years, I've divided it up into 2 segments. This is segment 1, looking at the archetype cycles, and here's segment 2, looking at the 12 houses. And of course, the free Mercury in Aquarius. Now, here is that chart by Inez Perry of the 12 biotissue salts. That's the 12 homeopathic salts, and you can see them listed right here around the outer circle. And this is medical astrology or health and wellness astrology, head to toe, Aries to Pisces, and this was some of her interpretations of that. This is taken from the book. Hold on a second, I'm going to get this book because I've got it right here handy. I use it a lot. This is taken from The Zodiac and the Salts of Salvation by George Washington Carey and Inez Eudora Perry. And this is an old book that you can still get, and they have this printout in the book. But it goes through that correlation between the 12 mineral salts of the body and their natural rulership of the 12 signs of the zodiac. This is one of the most basics when we are starting to look at health and wellness astrology. And the Zodiac and the Salts of Salvation was first published in 1932, Samuel Weiser. ISBN 0-87728-708-2. 0-87728-708-2. And I'm going to guess that this is still a book that you can get, and it has probably been republished. So this is one that you can still come across. So questions for anybody? I have got us through our materials, okay? And as I wait for questions, I'm going to let you watch me create more. Oops, wrong one. Copy. Okay. I'm going to let you watch me create a slide while I'm going through this. And so, solar. Any questions from anybody as I am doing this?
Questions for Kim on the Q&A board, or if you want to raise your hand and you're mic'd, which means you have earbuds or a headset, I'll open it up. And just a reminder, I think Kim she put in this slide, but we do have a big forecasting webinar hit list coming up in January with Saturn and Sagittarius, and of course the 2015 forecast. Go to forecasting webinars page that most of you know where that's at on the website, or pay attention to Astro News, and you could enroll right there with our newsletters as well.
What was it? I think it was 12:31 p.m. in Rapid City. So here you can see solar. And there you go. Nope, solar signs. I'm familiar with it, taking the sun and putting it at 152. And I don't know if SolarFire is going to let me do that. So I'll just use what they have right now rather than trying to figure that out. I know that there are some that actually, again, take that exact degree of the sun and put it on there. So there you can see solar house system. All right, everybody, so here we go. Solar house system, the sun is placed upon the ascendant. All house cusp of the same degree as the sun, although with SolarFire, as you can see, it takes it to 0 cap and then runs 0 degrees of the sign all the way around it. So that's probably the more popular way of using solar house systems if SolarFire has done that one. So then you can see, and this is sun sign astrology, by the way. You know, because they'll go, okay, you have sun in the first house and you have Uranus and Aries in your 4th house in solar astrology. And if you've watched or sun sign astrology forecasting, you've noticed that the astrologers who write sun sign forecasting are getting more in depth in the planets. And so again, all the planets falling in houses are relative to putting the sun sign on the ascendant. And that's how you get Uranus and Aries in the 4th house, and you get Jupiter and Leo in the 2nd house. Now, what they will also do then, if they use all 12 signs, they'll put Scorpio here 0 degrees, and then they'll rotate the signs around. Or they'll put Aquarius for Aquarius sunshine astrology, and then they'll rotate everything all the way around respectively. And so that's how a lot of your sun sign astrologers write their forecasts. All right, so if there are no further questions, then again, here we are with next year's classes. Look for the emails to come out. All of these are based upon the 2nd Tuesday of the month, except for February because I'm gone. And stay tuned, they may be subject to change with my travel schedule. And one more time, here are all of our public classes. And so thank you everyone for showing up for this one more time. Any questions on all of these different house systems? And if not, I wish all of you a very blessed winter solstice and a wonderful time with family and